that's probably where it comes from. I mean, I remember being in a camp, an overnight camp, and having a Name That Tune night, and they were playing, kids stuff. And then just, I remember the counselors were kind of having a laugh with each other, like, let's see if they can get this. And they put on Pink Floyd, The Wall. And I was able to recall it, and their jaws just dropped. I said, how did you know that?
Welcome to This Broken Mixtape, the podcast that rewinds and presses play on the soundtrack to your life. I'm Jeff Wu.
And I'm Justin Lee.
Darren Goldstein is a professional photographer who specializes in people, film and television, live music, and special events. Over the past 2 decades, Darren has photographed some of the biggest names in music, including Kanye, Drake, Taylor Swift, Alicia Keys, Katy Perry, and Mariah Carey. We sat down with Darren to discuss what makes the perfect live music photograph, the time Lady Gaga asked him if they could take a photo together, and serendipitously seeing Nirvana as a teenager.
This week our special guest is photographer Darren Goldstein. Welcome to the show, Darren.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good, man. So let's jump right into it. How did you first develop an interest in photography?
That goes back a long time, actually. I can remember a long time ago being pretty young and having a camera around the house and taking it on trips and using it. I didn't really think much of it at the time, but looking back on it now, I think I realized it was something different than not many people were doing my age. And I remember probably at the age of 12 going to my parents sending me to a photography camp for a few weeks over the summer.
Nice.
Doing like black and white, film development, darkroom stuff, all that kind of stuff. It was like a little nerdy at the time, but looking back on it, I think those are the formative years for me getting into photography. And then the big change, I think, was in high school when I took a photography course, and my photography teacher at the time really took to me, and she would let me have extra access at times to the darkroom, during lunch breaks or just during off hours, and that really helped me hone my skills a little bit. And I just really took to it then. And I'd say about halfway through high school is when I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to go to school for this. My goal was to go to Ryerson. It was the best school to go to for photography at that time, at least in the area. And I applied, and I got in, and I went, and it was great. And I made a lot of connections, and it just kind of took off from there. Those were the early stages of it. I mean, that's fast tracking a lot, but those are the real points that I remember being a big deal.
Mm. And in those early years when we were just kind of figuring out, how to develop as an artist and as a photographer, what kind of things would you be shooting subject wise?
Well, I mean, at first, I think, again, when I had a camera just around the house, it was like family. It wasn't anything too artistic, I'd say. It was just learning the technical aspects of the camera, how it worked, how it functioned, what it did. I think that again, that photography camp was kind of the first thing, and going around taking nature photos, landscapes. I don't think I've definitely now grown more towards portraiture and people. And when people ask me what I shoot, I usually say just people, anything with people in it. That's kind of what I do. And I don't. That took a while for that to kind of develop. I did a lot of band photography back in high school. I had a lot of friends who were in bands, and we would go out and have fun little photo shoots, and that again was probably the beginning of shooting more people and doing things this is kind of cool. This is something I can do, and we have all sorts of crazy ideas for band photos. So.
Tell us about some of those ideas, because I guess like when you're first starting off doing that sort of thing, you don't really have any like sort of reference to like what it should be other than just seeing these photographs in like your favorite albums. But, just in terms of giving them direction and stuff, what kind of things were you trying to get them to do?
We had a friend's band. They had a blue car with a blue hatchback, and we popped up the hatchback and we squeezed all 4 or 5 members in the back, and they were all squished in, and we just kind of did whatever we could at the time. We had no budgets for anything. We're shooting film at this time, so everything is, you can't just rapid fire away like the way you can now. You got a limited amount of rolls of film. I was paying for it all. I mean, it's not like I was charging these guys anything. So we would just kind of guerrilla style it, really. Just, I mean, one shot I remember we had guys hanging off of trees, fences. I mean, this is all in the suburban Toronto 905 area. Not a lot to look at around there, so it was just kind of going in people's backyards and going to the local park or the local school, something like that. It wasn't too gritty, but yeah, we had some looking back on now, we had some fun.
What would you say was like sort of the first concert that you were commissioned to do?
Well, it's a little different for me because I've been the house photographer at a lot of different shows or venues. So I have a big backing in the television world, and that's kind of where all my entertainment, band photography, all that stuff kind of funnels back to that. So the first really, I guess the answer to your question, the first thing was the first TV show that I worked on, which was a Canadian talk show called The Mike Bullard Show. It was filmed out of the Masonic Temple at Yonge and Church, and which was a great venue. I mean, it's just the venue alone was a classic venue for music. I mean, they go back years and years and years with when it was the Rock Pile, and they had all sorts of bands play there. Zeppelin, I think The Who played there. I mean, everybody played this place. And they would have live bands play one or two songs. And so that was probably the first real commission, as you said, to shooting these bands. And every day there'd be a new band in there somewhere, come and go. You never heard of them. And I remember we shot Deep Purple was kind of a big band at the time. And a lot of Canadian acts, Bare Naked Ladies, Hayden. It's just off the top of my head. I mean, yeah, that was probably the start of it. And that was really cool because every band that played was a different setup. It was a different sound. The lighting was different. So it was really, really cutting your teeth really quickly. I mean, you were cushioned by the studio. You kind of had this cushion of it, but at the same time, you only had 2 songs to get it. You're also dealing with cameramen in the way everywhere, so you can't get your dream shot because you might have a steady cam in your way. Mm-hmm. So you kind of had I was learning early on how to make do in those situations and be able to navigate those speed bumps, if you will. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
One thing I've always wondered is, as a music photographer, live music photographer, how important is it for you to actually enjoy the music that you're listening to? Because you're obviously, you're not there as a fan of the band, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the two can't overlap. So how often would you say it is that you are sincerely enjoying the music while you're shooting this band on stage? Well,
that's a good question because it's funny. What I found, especially going as far back as working on that show that I was just talking about, the Bullard Show, a band would come on, you'd hear about it, you'd show up, you'd be like, okay, whatever. But they might blow your mind. You've never heard of them, or you didn't think you'd like them. But there was something about being in that studio and being around these bands, and when you're part of something, you're sharing something together, which, as crazy as that sounds, because the band doesn't really register you being there. But as a photographer, you do feel like you're sharing something, and you kind of have something for you have a kinship or something towards it that you actually kind of gravitate towards, and it opens your eyes to a lot to that band. So you might hear that song that you might say, okay, that's kind of cool. I remember photographing these guys. So you might listen to them if you hear them on the radio or something like that instead of passing over it. And then a lot of situations, because you kind of work your way up in your career, and like more recently, I've got to photograph a lot of bands that I always joke that my 20-year-old self would have died to shoot. So I think the biggest example of that would have been shooting Weezer a few years ago. I mean, I was the biggest Weezer fan growing up. I had all their albums, and just that big lit up W with the wings on the to photograph that was I would kill to have done that, and I never got a chance to. And then rewind, I don't know how long it was, maybe 4 years ago, I got the call, can you come shoot it? And I got the shot with the big lit up flaming W behind these guys. And
yes.
It's one of my favorite photos. And, I'm not so much a fan of the band anymore. I don't listen to the music as much, if at all. But that was a big one for me. So a lot of the stuff has actually happened after much later on. So, it's just going back and getting to photograph things that yourself 10, 20, 15 years ago, however many years ago, would have killed to do. So you kind of got to pinch yourself and realize this is kind of cool, even though you might not think it at the time.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, other than Weezer, I mean, you've photographed a lot of really huge musicians, whether or not you're a fan of them, but like, just to name a few: Taylor Swift, Kanye, Drake, Justin Bieber, Alicia Keys, Ghostface Killah. Who are these, or any of the ones that I didn't mention, who are some of the ones that really sort of stood out in terms of not necessarily like that you were a big fan, but just the actual show and just the lighting, all of it, just that made your job easier and that you were actually sort of proud of once you saw the finished product?
Shooting a lot of these hip hop acts specifically, I don't know if I can zero in on one specifically, but seeing the way their fans are and the way they interact with their fans is pretty amazing because it's unlike anything else. It's not like a rock show where, again, referencing Weezer or something, those guys stand, they play, they're great, but I mean, these hip hop acts get right in there with their fans. They're sometimes getting right in the audience, and that that does happen with some bands and stuff, but not as much. And just that from a performance, from a show perspective, and being in that room, and that's pretty magical when that happens. And to see like Ghostface and Drake, those were like the first time being in when I shot Drake, we were shooting. It was a secret show up at the Key to Bala. So I mean, I don't know what the venue holds, but maybe 1,000 people in there, and he was pretty huge at the time. So just being in there, you're part of something special, and it's pretty amazing. It's a really cool, and you can just feel the energy in the room. It's a really cool experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point that you bring up because in hip hop shows, I mean, if it's actually a great show, because I've gone to so many shows that they just kind of like mailed it in. But when you go to a great hip hop show, the last one that I could think of that I went to was a couple of years ago. Chance the Rapper, and then another one, Anderson .Paak. And I think a lot of that has to do with just there being such a huge demand for energy from the artists, right? And there's a lot of call and response. So like, just your stereotypical throw your hands in the air, that kind of thing. And if you don't do it, then, that MC, that rapper's not going to let you get away with that. Like they demand it. And they feed off of that energy. And I think that's one of the things that can make or break a hip hop show is just how into it the crowd is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I spent my 20s going to every single local bar and seeing small shows and stuff like that. And I was a big music fan. I was in bands. I had a lot of friends who were really into music, and we'd go out all the time and go see bands play. And after a while, I just, the music was great and all, but I just got tired of standing around looking at my watch, waiting for the show to end. And because I was really into I was into hip hop, but I wasn't going to hip hop shows. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those were just 5-piece, 4-piece, 3-piece bands, guitars, bass, drums kind of thing, nothing too out of the ordinary. And I mean, they're all great in their own right, but when you're going to show every couple of days, it was just a little tiresome for me at the time. Mm. And I kind of took a big step back from it. I was like, I'm kind of done seeing these shows and going to all these shows and shooting and seeing some of these hip hop shows. There's just something different about them. There really is a different energy in there.
So run us through your process. When you are shooting, when you're being commissioned to shoot at a show, are you there for just, the first, I know a lot of photographers are really just there for the first 20 minutes or whatever, and then they take off once they get, a kind of a broad range of shots. Are you like that, or do you stay for pretty much the remainder of the show?
I mean, it depends on the client, on the show. There's a lot of media out there, photographers that are going out and shooting for a media source, and they go in, and it might be for, say, Live Nation or something, and they have their 3-song limit. You go in, you're in the pit for 3 songs, and they pull you out. Doesn't matter if you got what you got. Tough. But that's not really the way I've worked. And it's not because I've decided to do that. It's just never been that way for me. So most of my clients have been, they're kind of running the show. So they're saying, okay, Darren's our photographer. He's got all access to go wherever he wants. Not all the time, but a lot of the times it's like he can go wherever he wants. He can stay for the whole show. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's not so good. I mean, I definitely understand a lot of the reasons why the 3-song rule kind of is there. I mean, just from a makeup and sweat perspective, I mean, some of these people don't look so good after a couple songs unless they're diving backstage to get their makeup put back on or something.
I never even consider that.
Yeah.
3-song rule. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but a lot of times it's not like that for me. It's just go and shoot. But then, but the reality is after 3 songs, for the most part, you've kind of gotten all the shots that you can get, unless they're doing big costume changes or the set is changing or they're having guests on. So at that point, if a lot of those situations, I'll go up, I'll get my 3 songs at the front of the stage, and then if I still have access to shoot, then I might go backstage and shoot from the side of the stage. I might go to the back of the venue. I mean, one of my favorite things to do is shoot just from the back of a venue and get a really cool shot with the artist interacting with the crowd, or just getting the lights hitting the crowd and just getting some rim light across their heads, and you just get a feel for the whole room itself, you know. So yeah, so that's the approach is always kind of different depending on the client. Some might have a completely different set of rules or needs. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of times you show up and you think, okay, this is great. I'm going to, you know, because going back to your earlier questions, you might get really excited about some act you're about to go photograph, and then you show up and you find out you're actually not even shooting their performance. You might be shooting them in the green room, or you might be shooting something else, or a meet and greet where they're standing in front of a backdrop or something, or at a step and repeat, and you got 100 people lining up just to meet them. You're just there to snap their photos. So it changes quite a bit depending on the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How often do you get actual feedback from the artists themselves?
Very, very, very little. I mean, I'd say under 1%. Mm-hmm. I mean, the only time you might get feedback is if you're standing there with them. You know, I remember photographing, this is hilarious to say, but I was photographing Lady Gaga in exactly what I was talking about, a big line of people at a meet and greet waiting to meet her, and taking some photos, and then just walking up to her and showing her the back of the camera some of the shots we took. And you know, she loved them. I was really surprised. She really, really loved them and took to them, and she was really amazing to deal with. And so that there's that immediate feedback, even sometimes. But you know, I can't even think of a time that I've heard from an artist, and that's usually because the artists themselves are rarely hiring me to do it. You know, it's one thing if they're saying, okay, come to our show and shoot this for us and give us these photos directly. But the reality is a lot of the shots are going to a corporate client or a label, or, you know, I've had people come back and buy images off me to use for
play.
My parents weren't really big music people, to be honest. They had some pretty bad AM cheesy center field. The one thing I remember being in my dad's car, you know, with John Fogerty. Every time I think of music and my parents, that's the first thing I think of. But I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and my oldest brother, who's 9 years older than me, was a big music fan, still is. He was in a lot of bands. He was in a pretty successful Canadian band. They toured all over North America, well, really all over the world, but all over North America, touring arenas, being opening acts for like the Tragically Hip, Bare Naked Ladies, those kinds of guys. And so there was a big influence on me there from the stuff he was listening to, I'd say. That's probably where it comes from. I mean, I remember being in a camp, an overnight camp, and having a Name That Tune night, and they were playing, you know, kids stuff. And then just, you know, I remember the counselors were kind of having a laugh with each other, like, let's see if they can get this. And they put on Pink Floyd, The Wall, and I was able to recall it, and they were just, their jaws just dropped. I said, how did you know that?
How old were you at the time?
I was probably like somewhere between 8 and 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
You know, and I wasn't even like, it's not like I remember being a huge Pink Floyd fan, but this music was around. My brother had a turntable in his basement, so I would go down there when he wasn't around and put on his vinyl and listen to like his Beatles records, his Zeppelin, Frank Zappa, a lot of stuff like that. So if anything, that's what shaped it, and then more so the bands that he was surrounding himself with. So I was really into the Toronto scene back probably in the early 90s. So a lot of that stuff was the Rio Statics, the Inbreds. I mean, still to this day, I love the Inbreds. A lot of these Canadian Toronto bands, and just bands that were coming through at that time. That had a big influence on me and my friends. I mean, I remember going down to sneaking into clubs, or having my brother sneak me into clubs to go see some of these shows. And I must have looked like fresh-faced, like a total baby in these clubs, and me thinking, I can pass for drinking age around here. Mm-hmm. But so yeah, hanging out on Queen Street when I was probably 16 or 17. I mean, I knew I could drive at the time, so it was somewhere between 16 and 19. But I definitely wasn't of age, going into these clubs and seeing some of these shows, which was pretty influential. It was just cool to be a part of that scene and know it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what
was the first concert you went to?
The very first concert would have been the Jackson 5. So we went to the Exhibition Stadium. I don't even know what year it would have been, probably somewhere around 84. And we probably had like the second to last seats. So they were like silver, you know, metal benches, freezing our asses off on these seats. I couldn't have been more than 8 years old. I was probably way younger than that. And the two things I remember about the show is them all coming out in these big bubbles, like full-size bubbles, and they kind of emerge from these bubbles. And I also remember Michael crying at the show, just kind of breaking down and crying. He was like so sensitive to something. I can't remember what it was, but those are the really, like, I can't even tell you what songs they played. I was so young. So that was the first concert. And then when I was a little bit older, I still consider this kind of also my first concert. First concert alone would have been Van Halen with Sammy Hagar. So Van Hagar, I was a huge Van Halen fan when I was a kid. And so my brother took me to that show. I was, again, still pretty young at the time for that. That was at the Sky Dome. And actually, an interesting story about that one. The opening band, I remember getting booed off the stage, just literally booed off the stage. They stopped mid-song and walked off the stage and kind of gave a big FU to the crowd. And years later, I went back and, thanks to Google, searched it out and found out that was Alice in Chains opening up for them.
Wow.
And they got booed off the stage. But also, one of the cool things I get to tell people is I saw Nirvana. And the story is pretty funny because it was one of my other brothers, who's about 4 years older than me. His friend called me that night, or called him that night, I should say. Our house is when we had a home phone. He called him, called my brother looking for him, and he wasn't home. And then this guy says to me, he's like, well, what are you doing tonight? And I was like, well, I'm just at home. He's like, do you want to come down to the Maple Leaf Gardens? I got tickets. I got 5 tickets to Nirvana, and no one wants to go. So I said, for sure. So I hopped in the subway. I went down and met him. We took our 5 grays, which, if anyone remembers the Maple Leaf Gardens, that's like the 500s essentially, the cheap seats. We took our 5 grays and we upgraded them for 2 reds, and we sat at like center ice and watched Nirvana during their In Utero tour.
Crazy.
Which was amazing.
How old were you at the time?
That would have been 93, I think. So I'm 40 now. So I'll let everyone else do the math. I'm not gonna do the math.
I had an experience like that where I had a friend ask me, hey, do you want to go see Nirvana for In Utero? And I think it's the same thing. They had a ticket. I was like, no, that sounds dangerous. So I'm like the opposite of you, where I didn't get that experience.
Yeah. Well, I remember scalpers were selling tickets for $5 when we went in. Like $5.
Yeah.
And they weren't like nobodies. This is In Utero. They were big. They were, I mean, this is a year before he died.
Yeah.
So that still blows my mind when I tell people that. I mean, their jaws drop, but really just, that was pretty surreal.
And I remember this because I'm same age.
Yeah.
And then someone asked me, I'm like, I don't know. I haven't been to like a show like that yet.
I'm curious though. What did you think was going to happen though?
I don't know. It's just like, I was in high
school, right? It was definitely in high school.
I was, doing computers mostly all the time. I seen the music videos. I'm like, wow, that seems kind of dangerous. That's just what I imagined, right? Like people moshing and crashing into each other and stuff like that. So I said no.
Yeah.
It was the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And you're saying that you were playing in bands at the time as well?
Well, that was interesting too, because as I talked about earlier, just shooting my friends' bands. I didn't know how to play an instrument, and but I was around all throughout high school. I was around my friends, and they had their own bands. And one of my best friends, still my best friend to this day, Argo, he's like, dude, just like learn how to play bass. Come play in our band. Like, and I was, I don't know if I want to, and I didn't. And I just kind of was like the band groupie. I would just be the guy that always hung out with them while they rehearsed, and they always relied on me to give them a straight opinion of like an honest opinion of how they performed when they played shows. I'd be the first person they'd come to. Okay, like everyone's told us we were good, but no, really, how were we? And I would tell them. I'd say, well, this was good. This wasn't so good. The sound was bad. The drumming was off, and they'd really appreciate it. And so I was just really tight with the band. And then eventually, closer to the end of high school, I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I just picked up a guitar and taught myself how to play. And I would jam my friend who had finished. I was in my last year of high school, and he was finished high school already. He would pick me up on my lunch break, and we'd go back to his place and just jam and record it. And we'd jam for hours, and then he'd bring me back to school just in time to get back for my classes. And so that's kind of where it started. So that was the first band I was in. It was just a 2-piece band. We were called Big Fat X. I don't even know why we were called that, but that was the name. And then eventually we brought in a drummer, and we became a 3-piece, and we won a Battle of the Bands. And oddly enough, the guys who were the judges at this Battle of the Bands, it was a Battle of the Bands at Ryerson. The guys who were the judges loved our style. We were instrumental. We were really kind of out there, mainly instrumental, kind of math rock, prog rock kind of stuff. And we knew we didn't have a chance at winning this Battle of the Bands, and we came in there, and just so happened that the judges knew all of our influences at the time and were blown away with it. And they had these. I still have the scorecards at home, and they were just writing things like just listing off bands, like rare weirdo bands that even I didn't even know some of them. And they were like, "You guys sound exactly like these guys. We know your influences. This is great." And so we won the battle of the bands. We totally became friends with these guys. I ended up joining their band. They were called the Flame Jobs, and they were more of a garage rock band. So I played guitar with them. So I was playing with 2 different bands at the time. Eventually, most of my energy went into the Flame Jobs, and we did that for a bunch of years. We played down at the Alma Combo downtown. We played the Horseshoe. We had some okay opening gigs. We had a lot of fun. It was really cool. And then just after time, we kind of went our own way, and we kind of had a breakup, and that was kind of the end of my band playing for a while. And then just maybe 6 years ago, I started playing with another friend, just the 2 of us, and we would jam a lot and just all sorts of different instruments. Instead of just being a guitarist, I was playing keyboards, I was playing drums, bass, singing. It was just a 2-piece, and we had to find a way to fill that sound. So that was really cool. We really gelled really well, and then just life got in a little bit in the way, and it hasn't really happened as much lately. But those were really fun times being on stage. I still miss being on stage. Nothing beats that feeling. It's the best.
Well, I think it's interesting that you've had that experience, even if it was on like a sort of a smaller level, but to have that experience under the lights, and having like a concert, and now being in the place where you're capturing those moments, probably gives you greater insight into like what you're looking for, what makes a great shot. What does make a great shot, a live music shot? Like what kind of elements are you trying to get in there usually?
I think, lighting has a big part to play for sure. That's photography needs light. It's the number one essential thing for photography. So light's a big deal. And, I try to, if you're going to get not really technical, but if you're really thinking about it, I like to try to get some sort of background lighting, because a lot of the times if you're in a pit and it's a big stage, if it's not a small room or, you're at the ACC or something like that, you're shooting right at these people's noses a lot of the times. And a lot of those times you can have just a black background, and it's just not very dynamic. There's no depth to the photos. So you want to create some sort of depth that way. So using any kind of background lighting or background elements in general is really important. And then the next thing for sure would be just some sort of emotion, something, getting them doing something. Those are some of my favorite shots, is just getting some sort of visceral emotion coming out of them, which doesn't always happen, but you're kind of waiting for them to do it, because it's not like you're in a studio where you can direct them or try to influence what they're doing. You're just kind of a fly on the wall, really. So the only thing you can control is the lighting, your positioning, your camera angles, really, and just being aware. The biggest thing also is just being aware of what's going on, because there might be something going on behind you. The crowd might be lit up beautifully, and there just might be some sort of something. You kind of always have to be aware and be looking around and knowing everything that's going on around you to make sure that you're tuned in, because you can miss things easily, very easily. And once you miss it. You don't get that back. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you the other 10 guys beside you who are also shooting probably got that. So when whoever you're shooting for comes back and says, well, where's that shot? You don't have it. So not a good feeling on that end.
What are some of those rare moments, those magical moments that you've actually been there and were able to capture, if you can think back on some of the concerts you've shot?
Unfortunately, some of the moments are probably not the artist's best moments. There's something I shot a few years ago. He's a musician that's not so well received these days, so I don't want to get too into it. But he came on stage, had some beer on him, threw a bottle way up in the air, just landed right on the stage right in front of everybody. And these people were pressed right up against the stage, and it's not like they were lower than the stage; they were right at chest level with the stage. So he just was tossing bottles. They were breaking everywhere. They were shattering. They could have gone to the people's. Could have injured some people. It was kind of a bad scene. So that's not quite probably the answer you're looking for, but that's definitely some moments that aren't expected.
Mm-hmm. How about just in terms of casualties? Do you ever, usually like ideally you're in a sort of press media area, but when you're not, if you're at a show where you're just in the crowd getting a shot, has anything ever happened? Has any of your equipment ever gone broken, or, just in terms of fans trying to get to the front?
I mean, you're definitely fighting these fans sometimes when you're in the thick of it. If you don't, I mean, these photo pits are great because you just get ushered right in and you get to bypass all of that. But sometimes that's not there. So client might be like, a lot of festivals are like that too. So you're just at a festival. They're like, okay, just walk around for the day and shoot. And so you got to fight your way through all sorts of people in the crowd. And, they all want to stop. A lot of them are having a great time and they want to stop and talk. And sometimes they want to get a little too aggressive. So they might try to grab at you a little bit or grab the cameras or something. I mean, nothing crazy has happened, but just navigating that in general is a feat in itself. I'm also not a big guy, so I kind of, in some ways that's great for what I do, but also to try to force your way through a crowd sometimes isn't easy.
So if you can think about sort of just in the last, in your entire career, earlier you mentioned Weezer being like one of those bands that you always wanted to shoot. Was there anybody else on that level? And even if it's not music, I know you do a lot of film and television, any sort of public figure that you've always wanted to shoot? I
mean, one thing I've always, and I think this goes back to being around musicians at a young age, and even if they weren't the biggest, most famous musicians, but, being around a lot of these bands, the idea that they're just, I know it sounds stupid, but that they're just people is true. And so you never wanted to kind of encroach on their privacy or their space. Never wanted to ask anyone for a photo ever. And working on the Mike Bullard show, one of my jobs was to go to the green room every night and get a shot, like a portrait of the people in the show. And at the time I was a pretty big pro wrestling fan, and they would have wrestlers come in and out and be kind of excited to shoot them, but nothing, I would, maybe I'd have a little chit chat with them in the green room, but nothing more than that. And then Hulk Hogan was on, and I was like, I gotta do this. So I'm in this tight little room, and I get my shots of him posing with it, flexing, doing the classic Hogan poses, and then I'm just about to walk out, and I'm like, fuck this, I'm gonna go for this. And so I said, do you mind if I get a shot with you? And he's like, sure. And so we look around the room, and there's no one in the room except me, him, and his friend, who's also a guy from pro wrestling, Jimmy, the mouth of the South Heart.
Yep.
He's the guy with the big megaphone and everything. So he was there. So not only do I have this cool photo of me and Hogan, which my head is like the size of his biceps, but it was taken by Jimmy Hart, which is kind of cool. So that was like one of the very few times I've asked to have my photo taken with somebody, and I have had photos taken with them before, but it's usually on their request, to be honest with you. I mean, that Gaga story I was telling you earlier, the end of the story actually was that I'm showing her the photos off the back of the camera, and she turns to me and she says, oh, have we gotten a photo taken together yet? And I'm not going to say, well, I mean, I said, no, we haven't, but I'm not going to say, no, we're not going to do that. So
yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good, Gaga.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to do that. So there's this kind of awkward looking photo of me and Gaga. She's like towering over me because she's got like 12-inch heels on. So situations like that are, it's kind of fun to look back on it now, but it was never something I sought after or went after.
Yeah. She's no Hulk Hogan.
Exactly. Hulk, I was proud of that one.
It's also amazing that like it was just the three of you in that room. I mean, usually interactions with celebrities, there's just like tons of people, right? And to be in like a room with your childhood idol, that's insane.
It was huge. And that, I don't even think that would even happen today anymore with publicists. I mean, I'm not going to say publicists didn't exist.
Well, definitely not with Hulk.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true. But, that kind of thing, it's rare to even happen. I mean, you might, not to say you can't get a photo with someone, because obviously everyone's getting photos now with people with their phones and whatnot. But just that whole situation, that whole interaction would have, I can't see that happening now.
Mm-hmm. Going back to concert etiquette, but more specifically with social media, the rise of camera phone technology, everyone's taking shots at shows. It's no longer like, a social faux pas or whatever, but really like it's gotten to a point where I feel like no one's really watching the show. They're just watching it through their viewfinder or through their camera. What are your thoughts on that? And even if they do post these shots, do you feel that sort of takes away from what you do, from legitimate concert photography?
There was a time when it really bothered me. It's almost more you laugh at it, because you'll be there's times when I just go to a concert and I'll be in a big venue and you're maybe in the cheap seats or something like that, you're far away, and you got this person pulling out their camera and using their flash, which, I mean, you don't have to be a professional to know that's not going to do anything for you. It doesn't bother me. I think it bothers me more in the sense that just, these people are missing out on the experience itself. It's like, you paid all this money. It's like, you want to share it and tell all your friends about it, you can do that, but you want to be there. You want to experience that. And that goes back to the whole experience of a show. And to me, you know, like I said earlier, is I'd stopped going to shows for a while, and to get me out of retirement, if you will, I was like, I'm only putting my money down for a real show. I want, and one of the first shows, you might laugh about this, but one of the first shows I went to, like kind of out of my, you know, quasi retirement, was Motley Crue, because I knew those guys would put on like a killer show, and they did. I mean, you had Tommy Lee going across the stage on a high wire from one drum kit to another, 40 feet in the air. I mean, that's your money's worth right there. And if these people are pulling out their phones and they're just filming the whole thing and not really experiencing it, you're not experiencing, you're not engaging with it. And the whole social media thing has actually affected the whole aspect, all my work, not just my concert photography work, but everything I do. And at first it was a scary time, because these phones are starting to get better. I mean, you keep hearing about these are the DSLR killer. The iPhone X is the camera killer. But the reality is you still need a trained eye behind that piece of equipment. I mean, there's now photographers doing full Vogue spreads with iPhones. And, you know, maybe a few years ago, I'd really hate that. And I don't, because they're pulling off great shots because they have an eye for this. They know what they're doing. They know how to deal with light. And those people that are taking those shots on their phones, it's not taking money out of someone's pocket. And in fact, the reality is that people who understand the value of professional work are still going to hire you and use you to feed photos to their social media streams. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Joe Blow, who's shooting stuff for his Instagram feed, let him do it. I don't care, because there's a million clients out there that see the value in having professional work on their streams and other feeds, and they'll pay money for it. And so it turned at one point. It was you know, oh crap, I might have to find something else to do here. These phones are going to replace me, but they're not. It's just actually made more opportunities. Mm-hmm. You know, it's also taken away opportunities as well. I mean, some of the stuff I used to do, you know, I definitely see my stuff getting replaced by someone just grabbing it on their phone, or even just technology and cameras in general have become such a widespread hobbyist kind of thing that everybody thinks they can do it now. And some people are great at it. I mean, it doesn't take much now to be able to pull off amazing work. You just have to have the skills to do it. And great, if you can do that, then these people have talent, and the real talent should rise to the top. Mm-hmm. And one of the cool, I was at what festival was it? It was over on the island, and then they moved it to.
Is it Bestival?
Bestival, yeah, that's it. I was at Bestival. So I shot there for 2 days. I got hired by Fido to come shoot for 2 days there, and they just said they didn't have any shot list, didn't have anything. They said just walk around for however many hours and just get whatever you get. And I got some of the best work I've ever done. I felt like from the perspective like that, we got some really cool stuff. And one of my favorite shots I think it was during Florence and the Machines, and I'm in the audience. I've got my shots at the front. I've done my 3 songs or whatever it is, and then I move to the back, and I'm at the back of the crowd, and someone sticks with their phone, and they have they got those glowing wristband things. Mm-hmm. So they're holding up their phone, and they got both their hands up over their head with the bracelets on, and you can see the stage lighting behind it, like really, you know, out of focus and blurry. And it's this amazing shot with their phone lit up, and it's a great shot. And I go to their Fido stores, and I see that photo on the wall all the time now.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it's like one of my favorite kind of specialty shots that I've taken, and it's because someone's holding up their phone. I mean, when you get a room full of lit up phones the same way people used to hold up lighters back in the day, I mean, those are pretty cool shots. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
So I'll just use it to my advantage in the end.
Yeah. One of the things that I like on your social media is I think over the last few Halloweens, you've done these great family portraits, all in costume. You've done Star Wars, you've done Scooby-Doo, you've done Ghostbusters. I was wondering if you have any music theme ones in the works, possibly for this Halloween, or...
Yeah, so I have 3 daughters at home. You know, we used to do the theme thing. My wife was a big Star Wars fan, so when there was just 4 of us, we decided to do a Star Wars theme, and we dressed up. And you know, I'm a photographer, so let's shoot it. Let's make it look good instead of shooting it on our phone. So we dressed up and we got the shots, and that just kind of people loved it. People reacted so well to it, and we just kind of we were like, well, we have to one up ourselves. And every year we're just trying to one up ourselves. We've done Star Wars a second time now with our 3rd kid, and she was a little Ewok. That's my favorite one because she just fits the bill perfectly. we've had people make recommendations or suggestions, I should say, and some of them are music themed. We keep it under very tight wraps. What we're doing, we don't tell anybody until it's Halloween, until they see us out in the streets trick or treating, and then I guess later on that night when we release the photos. But it's turned into a thing to the point where people are always suggesting things, and I don't know if we're gonna go music themed yet. I mean, we got the ideas are kind of rolling in nonstop. I think we're actually kind of booked up for the next 2, maybe even 3 years, unless things change. I mean, we thought we were going to do one thing this year, and my kids have kind of overruled us and taken over what they want to do. So we'll see. Mm-hmm. But I wish you could be a fly on the wall for those shoots, because it's I don't know, for some reason when I end up photographing my family, I'm not the best person to be around. So it's like a day of preparation of like getting the costumes together and makeup and setting up all the lighting and everything, and it's just me barking at everybody trying to get the best perfect shots, because I'm like trying to just nail it, So it's kind of funny actually.
So as a father and a music lover, I mean, what kind of stuff do you play around the house? And are you like that music nerd dad that's like, you got to listen to Fleetwood Mac, or you got to listen to this? Is that even important? Is it just that they have a love of music?
That's been something that's constantly been on my mind. And when my daughters were younger, I felt kind of guilty because I wasn't putting that stuff on for them. When you have young kids, you'll play whatever you can to get them to sleep or to get them to calm down. So you're playing this crap, to be honest with you. It's kid stuff, and then if they've since graduated from the kid stuff to top 40 pop stuff, which I can live with. It's fine. But one thing I noticed, the way I ingest music, if you will, has been really interesting. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, ever since you asked me to be on. And it was kind of went through a weird thing, because, I mean, if I go back a bit, a lot of my close friends or / band members back in the day, they all worked at CD stores. All of them worked at used CD stores. And I would just go, and like a lot of them worked near me, where I lived or where I worked. And so on my lunch break or after work, I'd go hang out with them, and I spent hours and hours at these CD shops. And it got to a point, I don't know if this is something, I feel like this has something to do with it, but I got to a point where I got tired of browsing for music. I really did get tired of flipping through all the CDs and looking for something. And when I was in these bands with these guys were, I mean, I don't use this word as a negative word, but they were all music snobs. But they were great, because they would introduce me to music that I would have never heard, and they'd bring me a Burn CD, and they'd be like, check this guy out, check this band out, check this guy out, and I got into all sorts of stuff that I would have never heard of had it not been for them. But after a while, after I stopped being in the bands for a while, it's just something, and being a young father and trying to focus on my career, I don't know what it was, but my love, the fire for music kind of burned out, and I got really into podcasts, and not that I didn't listen to music, but I didn't care about music. I didn't have a love for it. I didn't seek it out. If it came my way, then great. I'd check out this band. I'd listen to this band. I'd go to this concert. But I wasn't like going after it the way I used to. And that went on for a long time, up until a few years ago, to be honest with you. And a few of my really close friends now are huge vinyl collectors, like just massive. One specific friend, Ryan, he's got just a huge plethora of a collection, and he's just constantly adding to it. I mean, he'll have like 4 different editions of one album, which to me is crazy. But and I would go, for Christmas or for their birthdays, I'd go out shopping for them, and easiest thing to get them is a record. So I go to a record store and I'd start flipping through records, and all of a sudden it came back to me, this fire that I was like, this is kind of cool. I kind of like browsing music again. And because I had stopped listening to music, I was starting to feel guilty about not playing it for my kids and not having it around the house. I mean, I turned to my wife, it's like, we don't even have a stereo system right now. We have like a little Bluetooth speaker. We don't care about sound quality. We just never have it on. Like, I want to change that. And then a few years ago, I got a turntable and started collecting myself. And now I found this perfect balance now for me, because almost the only time I listen to music now is on my turntable. I don't have a Apple Music or a Spotify, any of those subscriptions. I have a huge iTunes library, but the reality is if I'm editing photos, a lot of times I am listening to a podcast. I'm not going to be listening to music. I do, but not, I'd say it's like 80% podcasts while I'm working. And but the times that I do put music on is in my house, right around, from the time my kids get home from school, or if I'm getting home from work to the time they're going to bed, that's like prime time for music in our house. And it's just nonstop, one record after another, making dinner. Our house is is an open concept level house. So I keep the stereo right in the living room there. It fills the whole house with sound basically. And whether the kids like it or not, they're going to be listening to my stuff. And it's gotten to the point where it's pretty cool. Just the other day, I had something on, I'm trying to remember what it was. I had a record on that I wouldn't in a million years think they knew. And my 8-year-old daughter started singing along to one of the songs. And I said, how did you know that? She's like, well, I know this song. Of course I know this song. You play it all the time. And
kids are such sponges like that. Like you play a song for them a couple of times, they'll memorize it. It's crazy. So I try to push the Beatles on them because I think that's a great starting point for kids. And I've really tried to push that. And I got a ton of Beatles records. So I'm not pushing it to like, you need to learn everything about these guys, but they need to know some of the good stuff. They need to, eventually I'll teach them the difference between crap and good stuff. But right now, so they're listening to a lot of top 40 stuff, but my musical journey of ingesting music has really gone all over the place. And it's at a really interesting point right now because I love collecting vinyl now and I love putting on these records, but it's also changed the kinds of music I'm listening to because it is that time when my kids are around and it's that time of day. It's not usually I put on a record in the morning or late at night anymore. So I'm tailoring my purchases to those hours, which is an interesting way to kind of look at, listening to music. So it's a lot of like jazz and funk and, a little bit of, maybe a little bit easier rock than like metal or hardcore hip hop. There's all these hip hop records I love, and then I go and get them. I put them on. I'm like, I can't listen to this around my kid. At least not yet. So, or if I do, they call me out on it. And they'll like, Daddy, that's got a bad word in it. And so it's been a really interesting journey. And I really like where I'm at now because I'm going back and listening to a lot of stuff that either I used to listen to and I'm kind of repurchasing it now that I'm collecting vinyl, or I'm getting into stuff that I never even heard of. So it's a good balance of everything. Yeah, I think that really is one of the wonderful things about collecting vinyl is that you're able to not only delve back into your 16-year-old self, what you were listening to then, but to build on it and actually listen to stuff that you might have missed. Everybody has holes in their knowledge, so music is no different. But yeah. So that's almost time for us, but before you go, I want to ask you recently tweeted that Jimi Hendrix' Electric Ladyland is one of your top 5 records of all time. What are the other 4?
Wow. Maceo Parker and All the King's Men, for sure. That I was looking at it the other day, and I don't even know if it's a compilation. I don't even know what it is, but all I know is I just came across it once. I have a really big soft spot for funk and soul. So I'm always collecting a lot of that stuff, and anything kind of that comes from the JBs and James Brown and branches off. Anybody played with them, I really love that stuff. So that record, I found it last year, and I just I freaked out, and I love that. So that's definitely up there. It's got to be a Beatles record in there for sure. We're talking Desert Island. I'm visually going through my whole collection now, looking down the line. It's like picking a favorite kid. It's tough, but there's a lot of records that I really like. Beck's been a big, constant artist that I've been listening to over the years. And to be honest, I love his new record. It's really poppy. It's great. So right now, that might be something I take just to keep me in a good mood. As much as I don't listen to them now, if it's going to be a top record, maybe Check Your Head or Paul's Boutique from Beastie Boys. For sure. I don't know. There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of a tough one to ask for the very last question, but yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on our show. And where can people check out your work?
Everything's under DSG Photo. So my Twitter, my Instagram is DSG Photo, and my website's dsgphoto.com. And check me out if you ever need any photography.